Over the years, Sherri Coale has been quoted as saying, "Always leave your story better than you found it." Here in her final wrap-up session, Sherri is going to coach us on the concept of winning. Please turn your attention one last time to Coach Sherri Coale.
Thank you so much. And one last time, I want to recognize the other speakers from this event that provided their wisdom and expertise and energy and inspiration. Michelle and Jessica and Deloise and Lisa and Tiffany. Tiffany came out and began to sing, but I didn't know who was on stage. I was sitting on the concourse and I couldn't see, and I thought, who let an angel in this building? I made my way to the front and went, oh, that's my teammate, Tiffany. She's amazing. Amazing. And the things that they've shared today have been fantastic. You've been a terrific audience. You have wrapped us all in your spirit and in the love of Jesus. We felt it in this place today for sure. My job today is to wrap this thing up and to talk a little bit about winning. When our team finished games at the University of Oklahoma, we come into the locker room, and one of the first things our guys had to do was they had to fill out a piece of paper that was called post-game thoughts. And on this piece of paper that just said post-game thoughts had our name and then our opponent, and you could fill in the final score. But then it had two questions. And one question was, what did we do well and why? And the second question was, what can we do better and how? And every player was to come in and think through those two questions before I ever spoke to the team. I wanted them to think through and reflect upon what had happened over the course of the game. When it's over, everybody knows who won and who lost. The scoreboard is the reflection of the outcome. But I wanted our guys to think about it in terms of how this could help us moving forward and what we learned about ourselves and about one another and about our team as a whole. And so they would take those two questions, apply them individually and collectively. What went well and how? What can we do? Or what went well and why? What can we do better and how? Then I would come in after media obligations and talk to them just a little bit about that. And we would wrap up our post-game locker room by me asking them the same question that I posed the very last second before we took the floor before the game. And that is, when people walk to their cars or turn off their television sets after we finish playing, will they want to be a better version of themselves? Will they walk to their car, will they turn off their TV and walk to their kitchen or their bedroom and think, tomorrow I want to be a better teacher. I want to be a better lawyer. I want to be a better electrician. I want to be a better counselor. I want to be a better employee, a better boss, a better parent, a better friend. Do we play in such a way that they want to reach down inside and be better at what they do? Because if we do that, we win, no matter how many points we have at the close of the game. And if we don't do that, we lose, no matter how many points we have at the close of the game. There are so many things more important than the final score of a basketball game. The world has all kinds of different measures of success. They define it in a million different ways. And we can get so caught up in trying to reach the world standards by the world's measuring tools that we don't even know why we're doing what we're doing sometimes. When I think about success and what that means in the world, it's, do you have a powerful job? Do you make a lot of money? Are you thin? Do you buy the right clothes? Do you have the right hair? All those things happen, and then ultimately people discover they don't feel like they won even when they're winning. And the reason that happens, why you don't get that high from winning that you expect to get, is because you're playing the wrong game. We know that the only true victory is in Jesus Christ. I received a text message last night about 10:45 from a contemporary that I haven't spoken to in over a year, still involved in the coaching profession. And it was a very long text message, and she's been through a tough storm of life. It's been a season of storms. She lost her mother a little over a year ago. Her father's health is failing right now. She's struggling with the stresses of the volatile landscape of collegiate athletics right now. And before she got on the plane to go visit her father, someone had told her about my book, and she picked it up, and read the story called At the Arm of His Chair, which is about my father and his struggle and ultimately loss of life to dementia. And she said, when she read the story At the Arm of His Chair, she began to weep, and she wept and wept. And then she said she felt a peace because she felt like somebody else understood how she feels. And I got that text message last night, and it made me think that not only are we winning in Jesus, not only are we winning when we seek to follow him, but we're really winning when we share whatever experiences we have with others here that can help them also find him. So when I got the text message, it made me think about the sign that I have in my kitchen that says, God speaks to each of us differently, hoping we'll tell each other. And when I thought about the sign, it made me think about this story from the famous author, philanthropist, activist, feminist, Gloria Steinem. And it's a story that I'll leave with you today. Gloria was going to a symposium in Ghana, a symposium on sex trafficking. And as she flew across the world to go to the symposium, she stopped off at a friend's village in Zambia. She had a dear friend who lived in this village on the Zambezi River, and she stopped to see her. And when she arrived at this village, there was chaos everywhere. People were crying and moaning and running across the field and running toward one another. And this is a village that struggles with poverty. It's along the river. Its basic level of income has to do with hunting. And the men are allowed to take people on guided hunts, and they do that when it's in season. But the women don't have much way to make money. And it's a very difficult living arrangement in this village. When Gloria arrived, she found her friend and she said, "What is going on?" And her friend says, 2 of the women of the village went into town to sell themselves for sex, and they were murdered. And everybody in the village is trying to figure out what to do about it and how to wrap their arms around this occurrence, and we're all dealing with it. And Steinem didn't really want to stay because she felt like she was sort of infringing on a very intimate matter, and her friend convinced her to stay. As all the women were pulling these tarps and pillows and blankets into the middle of a very large field, they were creating a talking circle. And as many of you know from history, that talking circles are the sources of revolution. It's where people get together and find out they are more alike than they are different, and it's where they instigate change. Strength comes from unity. And so the women in the village were creating a talking circle. Steinem sat with them in the circle, and they began to sing some hymns, but there was a language barrier. She didn't understand their language, and she can't really sing, and so she just kind of sat there quietly as they sang some songs. And then they began to sing This Little Light of Mine, and they held one finger up, and she thought, I know that one. And so she sang in English while they sang in their native tongue, and they sang This Little Light of Mine together. And when the story was over, or when the song was over, there was one woman in the circle who raised her hand and wanted to speak. And she said that she was recently widowed, but for her entire adult life, she had been abused by her husband. And she just now felt safe enough to mention that. As is often the case, courage is contagious. This one woman's statement gave another woman courage to speak up and talk about issues in her household with her family. And another woman spoke, and another woman spoke, and another woman spoke. And it became apparent that the women in the village were going into town to sell their bodies for sex because they needed money to feed their families and to educate their children. Their husbands were not making enough income for that to happen, and so they were desperate to take care of their families, and so they would go into town, sell their bodies for sex so that they could feed their family and educate their children. And after hearing this for a bit, Gloria Steinem said, "How can I help?" And the women in the village said, one of the women in the village raised her hand and said, "We need an electric fence to keep the elephants out." She said, "Excuse me?" They said, "We need an electric fence because every time we try to plant crops, then the elephants come in and they eat whatever has come up, and whatever else remains, they just trample out. And we can never get enough to feed our families or to sell so that we can have enough money to educate our children. But if we had an electric fence that would keep the elephants out, then we could take care of our families." And Steinem said, I can do that. And so she went back home to New York City and had a dinner party one weekend with her highfalutin friends and raised all kinds of money and sent the women in the village an electric fence. And they sent back via the internet pictures of themselves rolling stones out of the pasture to create the bed where they would plant the corn. And they sent pictures of them installing the electric fence and pictures of them planting the maize and then pictures of these tiny green shoots coming up out of the earth. And after a year, Steinem said, I have to go back and see what's happened in my village of friends. And so she goes back to Zambia, and what she discovers when she arrives at the village is that people are singing, and they are laughing, and it is light, and people are enjoying one another, and they can't wait to show her, come look at the field. They show her these beautiful stalks of maize that have grown up. And they said, look in our barn, you gotta look in our barn. And they had corn stacked to the ceiling. They said, not only have we been able to feed our families over the past year, that we've been able to sell enough corn to educate all of our children, and we have enough for next year as well. Steinem calls this the parable of the fence, because not only did they feed their families and educate their families, the incidence of sex trafficking plummeted to about 0. And she calls it the parable of the fence because she said there are so many lessons there. Number one, that helping begins with listening. Sometimes we just want to go and we want to talk and we want to tell. Coaches are so good at that. The most important thing we can do to understand and provide a helping hand is to listen. Secondly, she said context is everything. Never in a million years would she have thought about an electric fence? Would she have thought that the connection between sex trafficking and raising corn on your piece of property could make a real difference? Number 3, she said sometimes the biggest problems have the smallest solution. Never would she have dreamed an electric fence to keep the elephants out would have solved the issue of sex trafficking. And finally, she said, we must all do what we can. And so when I think of the parable of the fence, I think of those things. Helping begins with listening. Context is everything. Sometimes the biggest problems have the smallest solutions. We must always do what we can. Isn't that in essence the Great Commission? Isn't that what we've been called to do? To help one another, not only to search out victory in Jesus, but to tell other people and to help other people find that. That is what it takes to overcome. And at the end of the day, that is how we win. Thank you for having me. Thank you for being here at this conference. You've been remarkable. Thank you.